Furloughing. Understand it? Confused? Let's take a look. Welcome to another episode of Business and You. My name's Mark. I'm from Humour Finance and we are property and business finance specialists. So today's topic is furlough, something that's become very, very prominent in the last few weeks and something that has got a lot of information going around social media and various sources. So we thought we'd get to the bottom of some of the more common questions that we get asked, and we've enlisted the help of Godsmark from Lynn and Partners to explain a little more. Let's take a look. Hi Nia, thank you very much for agreeing to spend some time to talk to us this evening. So we obviously are discussing the topic of furloughing staff. But before we get into that, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Nia. I work with Lynn and Partners. I'm one of the senior solicitors in the employment team. So furlough has been a hot topic, should we say, over the last couple of weeks. So hopefully I can give you and your followers some guidance on the best way to approach it.
Fantastic. Yeah, it certainly is a hot topic. Whilst we will concentrate on people with their cash flows, etc., one of the considerations is obviously when the support is due to come through. And one of the key things that we've discussed is the process and making sure that's followed correctly. So I think a great place to start would be what is the best process to follow if you're considering furloughing your staff?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when an employer's in a position where they are going to make the use of this furlough grant from the government, first thing they've got to do is identify who they want to furlough. So that might well be one member of staff, it might be a full team, it might be a bit of a team. The flexibility is there for them. So they need to select their individuals first, and we can talk a bit more about that process later. But also then once they've selected their group, they need to speak to them, notify them that they are potentially going to be furloughed. From that, they need to agree the changes with them. So most contracts won't have a provision in there to allow for furloughing because, well, nobody really thought about it. If the provision for layoff is in there, we believe that would be acceptable. But the safest thing to do is to get the agreement of the staff. Given the alternative, most will accept it quite readily. From there, that should be documented that they've had a change to their contracts. They are now furloughed. They may be on 80% salary or they may be topped up by their employer. There's no actual requirement for that. So obviously if there is going to be a change of salary, that should be agreed as well. And then at that point, they can confirm that with the employees in writing and notify the HMRC through the portal when it's set up, which is a big question mark, obviously.
Absolutely, yes. So no, great, thanks for that. So yeah, that's scheduled hopefully for mid-April, but we will see it's a mammoth task to create a entirely new portal specifically for it.
I think that's an important thing to note is that employers will be able to backdate to the 1st of March for furloughed staff. So they will be able to state when the portal's up that their staff have been furloughed from any point from 1st of March onwards. So although there may be a time lag in the cash flow in terms of actual sort of pound coins at the end of it, there shouldn't be. They shouldn't suffer for the fact that HMRC are taking a couple of weeks to get this up and running.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So, and that's great. And there obviously is a potential pressure, or there is definitely a pressure on cash flow for businesses currently with the revenues significantly hampered and this being paid in arrears in effect. So there is that pressure coming in there. In regards to, you mentioned about the whole team and the selection process, or that we'll come on to. So obviously people are looking to furlough team members as opposed to the whole business and hibernating the whole business. What's the sort of general advice that you give to business owners on that selection process?
Yeah, I mean, the selection process needs to be, I'm advising employers to think of it as a redundancy process, although obviously the whole aim of it is not to have redundancies. They should be applying the tests of who they get to furlough on an objective basis. So asking for volunteers is the obvious first choice, although you may find you get more volunteers than you actually want, so you might have a reverse problem then. But certainly asking for volunteers and trying to get some sort of consensus is a good start, but there needs to be a criteria that's not discriminatory. The only question mark we potentially have there is if people decide to make certain categories of people, i.e. older people, may be furloughed because they are more at risk. Would that then potentially lead to an age discrimination claim? So a bit of caution has to be used when it comes to selecting staff for furlough, and they should treat it as if they were undertaking a redundancy process, and I think that's going to be the safest approach, so some sort of matrix or objective criteria.
And I guess it's ultimately being transparent with the team or the staff members as to what that selection process or criteria may well look like as well.
Absolutely, because of course the consequence would be, if the furlough process doesn't work, it will be redundancy ultimately, will be the consequence potentially. So if employers enter into the process with that in mind and behave as if that was the end scenario, I think that'll offer them a little bit more protection, rather than going down the route. For example, we've had some clients who've looked to maybe furlough ladies with young children because it's going to be easier for them to be at home, which is a wonderful idea, but you can see the potential sort of discrimination argument that could get bandied around a few months down the line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So on that note as well, we discussed something that I didn't realise is this rotation of staff members who are being furloughed. Obviously, that could be really quite interesting for certain businesses who have got a skill set gap or a skill gap where they need to bring that around, or for other reasons, as you mentioned, isolation, loneliness, all that sort of good stuff. Do you want to talk us through that? Because that was something that I didn't realise until today.
Yeah, the minimum period of time that somebody can be furloughed for is 3 weeks. And the guidance we've had at the moment is that can then be rotated. So, for example, you could have put somebody on furlough for 3 weeks, and then after 3 weeks, they could come off furlough, and another member of their team could go on furlough, and then that person could go back on. So once they've come off furlough, that's not sort of fatal. They can go back onto furlough. So you could then put yourself in a position, particularly for staff maybe where there's a skill set, there might be a bit of skill fade if they're off for a prolonged period of time. And that also could deal with the bit that people seem to be ignoring, which is the staff that are not on furlough might get quite aggrieved that they're holding the fort and working probably twice as hard and not really getting much financial benefit for that. So it's a good opportunity then for nobody to feel singled out either way, whether they're furloughed or not. So the idea being that you could look to maybe have a 3-week rotation going amongst your staff, but 3 weeks is the minimum period for a furlough.
Okay, great. Well, as I say, it's something new that I haven't heard of. Well, I say new, but certainly haven't heard of. And I guess that's been quite a useful tool really for businesses. Back, I guess, to the cash nature of what this is all about, what this fundamentally is for, to allow businesses to potentially hibernate, certainly reduce their cost base where they need to because of the absence of the normal trading revenues. With regards to this, is there the ability under the furlough process that they can furlough staff, however, not pay them until such time that the funding support materialises?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's agreed, potentially yes, that would be an option for employers to look at. I know there are other options which perhaps you'll probably be better placed to discuss with clients, such as business interruption loans, etc. There maybe to assist with that short-term gap, because of course it's all well and good an employer agreeing with a member of staff they're not going to get their money until such time as it comes through, but at the same time they've also got bills, and it might not engender the type of strong relationship between employer and employee going forwards. That they might remember that unfavourably. So there are other options for businesses, but yes, from an employment law point of view, that could be agreed. What wouldn't be acceptable is to simply say we're going to have the furlough grant and we're not going to pass it on to you and you can sit at home on nothing until you return. I think that's very unlikely to be accepted, but certainly the suggestion that we could say you'll get paid when we get paid effectively would work. I say, aside from the fact it might not be very popular, and equally some members of some employers are looking at instead of saying that to their employees, you're going to take a drop of salary to 80%, they've actually phrased it in a way that says you're going to take a drop of salary to whatever we receive from the government, because there's been a whole raft of discussions in terms of what is actually included, as bonuses included, as commissions, etc. And it's likely that the government's definition of what's included is going to be slightly different to what the employee might think is included in their take-home pay. So we have seen that creeping in now the last few days, where people have suggested that they say instead of putting a raw figure on it as such, they just say, look, we'll give you whatever we get. So that's again an additional little sort of protection that employers can put in place. But in the short term, yes, if they can agree it, then that is acceptable. But good luck getting the agreement for any length of time, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that this, you touched upon a point there really, which is about the employer and employee relationship, and is that how you behave now as an employer is really going to cement your relationship going forward when you hopefully come back out to the other side of this. So, yeah, I understand the business to survive, but equally there is a person at the end of this process that needs looking after.
And certainly our understanding is that it works as well, but a bit similar to some maternity leave, in that you can have sort of stay in touch days, etc. So I think the idea of, just particularly because it can be quite an isolating time, particularly given everything else that's going on, there is no frowning upon the idea of keeping your staff sort of in the loop, and maybe not bombarding them with emails, but certainly keeping them in the loop, and that's unlikely to be frowned upon. And the same thing, for apprentices or people on training, there are some flexibilities there. What the employee can't do is earn money for the business while they're on furlough. But the aim is to keep these members of staff on board, so that when the economy does start to recover, they're there and raring to go effectively. So yeah, if you keep that essence in mind, shouldn't go too far wrong.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. No, I think, those are kind of the main points that we wanted to cover. And some great bits of information really there for employers and employees actually alike. As I say, the more transparent this process is, probably the better that everybody will understand it and be able to work with it. Hopefully the fewer disputes that will ever come from it at a later date. But yeah, so really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us this evening. And no doubt, should anyone have any questions, they know where to get in touch, and we'll share your details with everybody later on in the video.
Absolutely, that'd be great. Yeah, if anyone's got any queries, feel free to get in touch.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so some great insight there from Nia. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. So some really interesting points that were brought up, of which we just wanted to surmise really what was covered. So some key things. Consider the process, making sure you're following the right process so there can't be any disputes, or reduce the likelihood of having disputes at a later date when everything seems to settle down a little bit. Making sure that your existing employee contracts have the ability to furlough staff. Making sure that if you only need to furlough some members of the team, that you clearly define what your selection criteria is to avoid any discrimination claims or disputes at a later date. Rotating of staff. Minimum term of 3 weeks, very useful for skill set. Also useful to manage the wider team for those that may feel slightly aggrieved that they are in work where their colleagues may not be. Then of course the question we get asked a lot, which is around the being able to afford to pay the staff until the government support comes in. The answer is no, you don't have to, but obviously communicate with your team members, agree something that's amicable, that is workable, and hopefully that will help you get through that. Thank you very much for tuning in. We hope you found it useful, and we'll be covering many more topics around business and the impact that COVID-19 is having with everybody, and some various hints and tips along the way as well. So keep an eye out for the next video. Thank you very much for watching, and stay safe. Bye for now.